Okay. Time for the science news. Time for the science news. Not sciencey, but hey, look at this. Full page ad. Welcome to the YouTube era. Oh yeah. And as you can see there, it's Chaperone and so where's my picture? Oh, maybe I was on the second page. I must be on the second page. It says, the media center of gravity has shifted, and at the center of this shift are YouTube creators. They're the new networks and studios, the most trusted voices in media. Their fans are watching literally by the billions, and they've carved out their place and YouTube's as the future of media. Hello. For marketers, that means views turn into value across every screen. Millions of creators ready to connect you to your next customer. Yep. It actually says, yep. Yep. This new era looks nothing like the old one. Move fast and break things. Meet the new boss. They killed the old boss. Yep, this new era looks nothing like the old one. And trust us. They want you to trust them. This is just the beginning. The YouTube era. YouTube era, baby. No going back. No going back. All right. We start with, I've been talking about this every week. It's still in the Philly news. Philly and region. Yep, it's these little guys here. More delivery robots are prowling center city streets. Restaurants say, there's one right there, doing its thing. Innovation or bane? It is still up to debate. There are restaurant owners that are using them and restaurant owners that are not using them that are what a problem they are. But yeah, they're being used on Race Street, Spruce, 18th, and Front Streets. There's like a quarter, but also Sansom Street. There's a little hub down there that I found them collecting. There's this little spot, East Broad on Sansom, where they congregate, they sort of like. I've seen them, they kind of run to this spot and they just kind of like shut down and they kind of like park there. This is the thing. They take up space, public space, because they're not only running on the sidewalk, they're also parking on the sidewalk, like when they're not being used. They have these spots that they're basically just taken. It's like the people that basically like when they leave for work in the morning, they want to keep their parking spots, so they like drag down a couch and put a couch down on the street, saying that's my parking space, like even though it's like public parking space. Well, these little robots, which are not that little, I mean, they're like, the size of, they're like the size of like a washing machine. And apparently they weigh about as much as a washing machine. They said about 150 pounds empty. They're not toys. They're causing some controversy because the fact that they're using sidewalks to travel, just like e-bikes and stuff. So it's a motorized vehicle on the sidewalk, which is already against city ordinance because you're not allowed to have motorized vehicles on the sidewalk. Not allowed to have bicycles on the sidewalk. It really is against the law. So Philadelphia lawmakers are skeptical of food delivery robots. Here's a couple of them. See, like I said, they start congregating, and so sure, it's an experiment now, and they've got like a handful of them running around. But when the population of delivery robots gets up into the hundreds, and you find out that like every block of every sidewalk is lined with parked robots waiting to deploy, and that they're coming and going all the time, and the sidewalk becomes literally a corridor of robots zipping along, making deliveries, or parking, or charging, or going to a charging station, or coming from a charging station, or going to a parking spot, or coming from a parking spot. And you, the pedestrian, you are the one who's like dodging robots. Well, Philadelphia lawmakers think that this has to stop. So those more censorious of the robot overlords have an ally in Councilmember Jeffrey Young, who last Thursday introduced a series of regulations on food delivery companies, included as a provision tacking a $1,000 surcharge to each delivery of food or goods by autonomous delivery units using the sidewalk. So it's basically they're trying to introduce a punitive tax. I don't know if this will pass through City Council, but something, I mean, $1,000 per delivery is the idea, is to make it unusable. That's not going to pass. But the idea of putting a hefty fee on the service to discourage it would definitely be a help. The delivery companies would pay the charge under Young's legislation, although the fee is so onerous that it would effectively force the robots out of service. Yeah, but it has to go through City Council, and they probably get. I've talked about this before. Bribery is not illegal in Philadelphia, so you can literally give quid pro quo any amount of cash to a city council member in exchange for a favor, and it's completely there's no law against it. So Philadelphia city government is a strangely corrupt place. It always has been, because bribery is just there's nothing illegal about it. So I expect that nothing will get through City Council, because Uber Eats and all these companies, they'll just dump loads of cash onto City Council. They'll basically buy away the legislation, whatever it is. These robots are still on like a pilot program. In a letter to Council President Kenyatta Johnson on Friday, Waxman suggested, that's Ben Waxman, requested that the council consider legislation that orders the Streets Department to, quote, to prohibit or significantly limit the operation of personal delivery services in the most congested portions of Center City where their operation would constitute a hazard. I agree 100%. He noted how the bots often share the sidewalks with seating, strollers, and people using wheelchairs, and how about just people just walking along like me? Waxman said many of his constituents have peppered him with questions and concerns about the robots. So, yeah, we haven't heard the end of this. I wouldn't be surprised if City Council puts something in the works to rein in, because the problem is if they don't institute something to constrain the use of delivery robots, it's just there's going to be tens of thousands of delivery robots in Center City. It's going to be just, I would say I can't imagine, but I can imagine the very limited Philadelphia sidewalks being completely filled like a congested freeway of delivery robots, e-bikes, scooters, and motorcycles. And I imagine myself trying to walk anywhere in the city with the sidewalks completely freeway congested with robots, e-scooters, motorbikes. It's just, we're headed for there's got to be a reckoning, Okay, enough about the delivery robots. This is Dateline Mars. There's Mars right there, the red planet. Can death-defying fungus overtake Mars? Not if Earthlings don't let it aboard. So, turns out there are some species of fungus that are very common on the Earth that are apparently very, very hard to kill. One in particular, a form of fungus called Aspergillus calidosus. Aspergillus calidosus. It's actually a very common strain. It's hard for me to pronounce it, but it's one of the most common strains of fungus. Guys, I had all this testing, so I actually learned a lot about fungus. But Aspergillus, it's everywhere. It's like in every home. It's in soil. It's basically it hijacks on pollen, So we breathe it in constantly. Attached to pollen grains. It grows on plants outside. Grows on indoor plants. It's just everywhere. But it seems almost unkillable. Fortunately, it's not dangerous to people. Most people don't have any kind of allergy to this particular fungus. It's just sort of like any other plant. I had testing done to test my own allergies, and I'm not allergic to it, and I'm allergic to virtually everything on the planet. So it probably means that for the most part, human beings are kind of immune to it. It's just sort of everywhere and ubiquitous, but very hard to kill. Which, for the most part, for people, it doesn't make a difference. But for your spacecraft, this could be significant, especially if you're sending that spacecraft to a planet that you want to search for life on. Researchers recently identified the strain living inside NASA facilities and subjected it to brutal challenges that simulate those of space travel and Mars itself. Scientists' findings reveal that, unless NASA's cleaning protocols change, the robotic systems that explore the surface of Mars could inadvertently infect the planet with colonizing spores. Atul M. Chandler says, he's a researcher at the University of Mississippi, says, "This is really about doing exploration responsibly. As we explore this universe," this is what he said, we want to be able to send aircraft, obviously aircraft, spacecraft, without bringing any hardy Earth microbes. NASA follows international guidelines called Planetary Protection Protocol, aimed at making sure Earth's biology doesn't taint celestial bodies and vice versa. The agency has also blah, 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 blah. Previous studies have identified various forms of bacteria and fungi on NASA facility surfaces, including the ultra-filtered clean rooms where spacecrafts are constructed and tested. So apparently, some of these protocols are not nearly strict enough to prevent us from infecting Mars. We might have already infected Mars with microbes. We sent enough rovers, spacecraft, hell, even like the parachutes on spacecraft, or the airbags that are deployed, to stop, some of them that were like drop and rolled, all that stuff. If microbes got on to some of those things, if fungus got onto some of those things, these things could feasibly find a way. They could adapt. It's a remote chance, but they could adapt to the arid, super arid climate, the low pressure atmosphere. Could they synthesize amino acids out of Martian regolith? We just don't know yet. Yes. Researchers examined 27 fungal strains taken from the floors of NASA clean rooms used in the Mars 2020 mission, plus 2 control microbes that tolerate radiation well. Most of these samples that survived the ultraviolet screening and underwent more intense treatments died quickly, but the A. aspergillus, taken from the Florida assembly facility, endured. So, can't kill it all. We probably have already delivered some microbes to Mars, because it turns out that our protocols aren't good enough. And if we're going to be going to Titan and Europa, stuff like that, boy, we better get it together. This was interesting. This is a tale of where politics and science literally overlap. U.S. and China rivalry reaches the skies of South America. This here, that is a fully constructed but as of yet unassembled radio telescope that the Chinese were about to complete in Argentina, in the San Juan province of Argentina, the Sesco Observatory. The United States intervened to prevent. They used political pressure to prevent China from being able to complete the assembly of this radio telescope. So it just sits there. You can see the 3 parts. You see there's the base. There's the base there. There's the little yaw yoke, that the mount, And there's the dish. 1, 2, 3. But unassembled. And apparently it's going to be permanently unassembled. But basically the article is about how the United States has been using its Monroe Doctrine chops to intervene in China's technological and scientific encroachments in our hemisphere. The idea that basically the administration wants to block China from doing any scientific research in our hemisphere using the Monroe Doctrine. Argentina's agreement with China to build the telescope expired last summer, shortly after customs authorities froze some key parts of the antenna in the port of Buenos Aires. So, yeah. It's a small story, but it's this kind of thing extends all over the globe. Antarctica, there's things going on. There's kinds of rivals. Yeah, so in the science news is the Sunday Comics from the Inquirer, the Sunday Comics. I just thought it's like Wumo is one of my favorite comics, and I've posted things about Wumo in the past, and a lot of people, especially like in Europe, talk about how Wumo is their favorite comic too. But I took umbrage. I took umbrage with one of Wumo's comics recently. This one, when Kenneth discovered that he wasn't a flying squirrel. Splat. We told you. Well, I take umbrage with this because this cannot happen. First of all, important note, flying squirrels do not actually fly. They are simply an adaptation. But all squirrels, regardless of whether they're black squirrels, gray squirrels, red squirrels, all squirrels have the ability to leap from any height and survive. The squirrels, as a species, they can survive any fall from any height because their bodies, their body weight and their body to weight ratio and their anatomy and the way that they fall, when they leap, they put out their front paws, they put out their rear legs, and they throw out their tail. And squirrels reach terminal velocity very quickly. So it doesn't matter how high up they're jumping, they immediately, within a second or two, reach terminal velocity, and they can just continue to basically glide down, even the non-flying versions. The only difference is the flying squirrel, they have extended skin flaps, like between their limbs, that allow them to go much further. They won't just fall, they can actually paraglide and actually like travel, travel horizontally a bit, the flying squirrel, but they're basically just exploiting the same configuration that all squirrels have. Any squirrel can fall from any height and land just fine. It's one of the cool things about being a squirrel. Doesn't matter if you leap off a redwood or a skyscraper. There are some, you can watch YouTube videos where there are some squirrels that have jumped from like insane heights, like in the city. And you watch them leap off the top of buildings and they're just going, and boop, and they just run away. It doesn't matter how high, but yes. Would a squirrel land just fine if it jumped in a vacuum? The squirrel would not be alive if it jumped in a vacuum. If you're talking about putting a squirrel in a tiny little squirrel spacesuit with a tiny little EVA pack, yes, the squirrel jumping in a vacuum would be freeze-dried and would be dead anyway. So, yeah, on Earth, anywhere near sea level, air density makes it so that in any climes that squirrels live, because squirrels don't live in high altitudes, so far as I know. They don't live in mountainous areas. Squirrels live near sea level, and near sea level, squirrels can leap from any conceivable height that they could climb up. Getting away from squirrels, yes, EVs were a big deal over 100 years ago. This is true. If you've watched the Jay Leno, he's got this YouTube channel where he talks about cars. He's got this massive car collection. He's very proud of his electric car, and he's shown it off a lot. And I believe he has this very car, a Baker. I think that's what he has, is the Baker. Anyway, but yes, very interesting, the history of the electric car. Yes, way back in the 1830s. Now, that's not a misprint. 1830s. 1830. We're talking before the electric light bulb, before the telephone. The 1830s, Robert Anderson of Scotland built a motorized carriage that was truthfully more... Yes, galvanic cells were neither rechargeable nor long-lasting, but it did work, and fellow inventor Robert Davidson in 1837 had constructed a prototype for an electric locomotive capable of hauling 6 tons of blistering 4 miles an hour. Yeah, so... But in 1859, again, predating most electrical technologies, 1859, Gaston Planté of France unveiled the rechargeable lead-acid cell, and by 1884, again, we're talking a long, long, long time ago, 1884, Thomas Parker, already famous for electrifying the London Underground, turned his attention to electric cars. A decade later in Iowa, William Morrison patented an electric carriage that he'd been tinkering since 1887, offered a 50-mile range, 4 horsepower, which was nothing to sneeze at back then. I mean, we're talking the strength of a 4-horse carriage. That's a lot. 20-mile-per-hour top speed. Blazing in the 1880s. And that was before they had, like, macadam. So, I mean, you're talking about 20 miles an hour on basically bricks, rocks, or dirt. That's pretty fast. So Morrison debuted the electric car at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Caused a total sensation, yeah. So basically by 1900, roughly 1/3 of all American vehicles were electric. Yep. So what happened? Well, it was really going to be a neck-and-neck race between electric cars and gasoline cars. Because in the early days, gasoline was unpredictable. Gasoline cars were hard to start, and gasoline was of such poor quality that, gasoline engines would conk out, and you had to crank start. And a lot of crank start engines were dangerous because, you had to have like a cog in there, and you had to crank a flywheel. You had to do it with your arm, and they were sometimes called widowmakers because a lot of times someone would be cranking to start the car, and it would kick, misfire or something, and that crank, rather than just freewheeling, it would just fly up and hit them in the face and knock them out or kill them, or break their arm, or take their arm off. Yes, okay, so I'm getting ahead of myself here. Yes, so when Henry Ford was producing just one gas-powered car, a company called Columbia in Hartford, Connecticut, already had thousands of electrics on the road. Entire fleets of taxis worked in the streets of New York on batteries, electric taxis. And by 1910, Detroit Electric was selling roughly 2,000 cars a year. And the Baker, which is that Jay Leno car, the Baker Motor Vehicle Company in Ohio flourished at the same time with its Imperial Roundabout, which found a particularly notable home, Thomas Edison's garage. Yeah, women overwhelmingly preferred electrics. No arm-wrenching cranks required. And there's an interesting little piece of film from, I guess, the 30s. It's a sound film. But we saw it, my friend Jay Schwartz, which does a thing called The Secret Cinema, and he showed a piece of film. It was a sound film, but it had this little clip in there of a woman in a car and at a gas station or something, and the car just and she gets in the car, and it silently just drifts off. And people in the audience were like, "What? That's ridiculous! They didn't put any sound in there. What's the deal?" And people had to whisper, "That's an electric car. It's in the 30s, so that's an electric car." But yeah, it was a Baker. But yeah, it was. The article says it was the invention of the electric starter motor, that killed the electric car. Once the electric starter motor became available and standard in cars by the 19 teens, it was all over for electric cars. Because by then, Gasoline cars could be made cheaper because Henry Ford had, basically his assembly line technique had gotten the cost down on cars. And with electric start, that was it. The cars were cheaper and gas was cheap, and you could go further on a tank of gas than you could go on a charge of batteries. And with the electric starter, that was it. It was going to be gasoline cars. But it is interesting that at the beginning, it really was a neck and neck race, and it very well could have been electric cars if it weren't for a handful of factors. Well, mostly Henry Ford's desire to be the richest man on the planet. That was one. The Elon Musk of his time, or Elon Musk being the Henry Ford of his time, and the electric starter motor killed the electric vehicle. This was interesting. This is an advertisement, but you usually don't think about this. When we think about processors, we're thinking about, processors used to be like a 1-inch square for like a CPU, and then CPUs got to be like 2 by 2. They got to be like those big heat sink mounted things with 1,000 pins on them. Well, so this is an advertisement that shows bigger. When it comes to AI, bigger is better. So this is like actual size. So we got here regular CPUs, right? Regular CPU size. And then this here, this is a wafer-sized CPU. That's all one chip, actual size. Wow. So, damn, wafer scale engine. So it's an entire chip, one wafer, one processor. Can you imagine cooling that? Man, that would have to be like bathed. It would be like in oil, like mineral oil bathed. That would have to be like liquid cooled, some kind of crazy. How do you get the I/O? I mean, the pin bed on that must be. The world's fastest AI runs on the world's biggest chip. But that's just crazy. That's like, that's what, like 8 by 8 inches. One chip. Cray. It's cray. Will the wonders never cease to kill us? That is going to be your new overlord. And now we switch to the terrible news. This is the cool science news has gotten really thin. The terrible science news has gotten so thick. I'm going to try and rifle through it. I don't want to linger, but the terrible science news, there's just so much of it. Just start right at the top here. Losing science at federal agency. Yeah, the administration has all but ended the independent research work of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, which has been rebranded the Petroleum Protection Agency. Yep, I talked about that last week, about how the director of the Petroleum Protection Agency has vowed to protect all petroleum and coal at the expense of everything else. The environment is out the door of the EPA. For more than half a century, the prestigious scientific arm of the federal government did groundbreaking research aimed at saving American lives. It studied fertility, asthma, wildfires, drinking water, climate change, and a myriad other health threats. But, as is the case, no more. The research wing of the EPA has been completely dismantled. There were, among the 1,500 biologists, chemists, and other experts at the Environmental Protection Agency's Office in Research and Development who have been laid off, resigned, or pressured to retire, so basically forced retirement. But 1,500 scientists have been taken away. 124 researchers remain out of a core of over 1,500 that were there just a year ago. Think about that for a moment. Many of them that remain are faced a recent deadline about whether they would abandon their work and move to different parts of the agency or different parts of the country to remain employed. So that was one of the tactics to try and get the scientists to leave the EPA, was to reassign them. Like, they're working in Washington, D.C., they've got a family and children. Oh, we're reassigning you to Anchorage, Alaska. Oh, you're going to be working in the Antarctic. You're free to quit. There's the door. That's how they pretty much dozed the whole agency. Those who stay will no longer serve an independent unit designed to be free from political interference. Instead, they will be overseen by Trump appointees personally or a new unit directly under the administrator, Lee Zeldin, who is Trump's personal buddy and who made all those promises about protecting coal and oil into the future is the mission of the whole administration. Here's Jennifer Zavaleta says about the EPA. The EPA just blew up a very well-performing organization that was making a difference not only in the country but in the world. Dismantling the research arm will damage the agency and weaken the government's ability to protect the public health. Well, it's basically that there is no more EPA. There's no more protecting the health of anyone. The Science Office operated the world's only laboratory specializing in controlled human exposure studies to determine the health effects of vehicle exhaust, wildfire smoke, ozone, and other pollutants. The world's only research center. All gone. And that's Humpty Dumpty. You're not putting that back together again. It took 40 years to build those organizations, those systems, those carefully selected experts to do that research. It took 4 decades to build that machine, and it was smashed in months. You're never getting it back. Ever. Yeah, there's another one. Losing science at the EPA. Scientists at the EPA had created a research scientist, blah, blah, blah. Yes, Bridget Hirsch, spokeswoman for Mr. Zeldin, that's the guy that has dismantled the whole thing with a smile on his face and talked about beautiful, beautiful coal. They released a statement saying, gold standard science is happening like never before at the Trump EPA. She said, calling the notion the agency is suffering scientific losses, an absurd narrative from people who know better than... This is so ridiculous I can't even read it. It's just, yeah, I mean, the chest beating and bluster of them saying that they're doing a better job than anyone's ever done before. It's like, oh my God, I can't even parrot this. Yeah, the bottom line is there's really nobody anymore that will be looking out with a comprehensive, independent perspective at the quality of our environment and the quality of our health. That's it. It's over. And more terrible news. Let's see here. Yes, scientists press Congress on Trump's dismissal of the National Science Foundation Board. Another troublemaking bunch of nerds with reading books and like doing like science and stuff. Let's get rid of them because gotta trust your gut. Don't listen to science. You know, the president's gut knows about what's right with the environment and science. More than 2,500 scientists said in a letter to Congress on Monday that the Trump's dismissal of the National Science Foundation's Oversight Board was, quote, an alarming attack, end quote, on research funding that could put the United States at a disadvantage with rivals, especially China. Do you think? Former board members have been trying to call attention to what they say is a growing research funding gap with China. Last week, the NSF published the board's 2026 report on the state of U.S. science and engineering, which the board had finalized before its dismissal. In the report, the board warned that China had overtaken the United States in research and development expenditures. And apparently that's something the administration didn't want to hear, so they just destroyed the entire National Science Foundation Board. Just dismantled the whole thing. Nope. Deliver bad news, you get the guillotine. 4 people formerly on the board date the deterioration of its relationship with the administration to April 2025 when the NSF canceled hundreds of active research grants without consulting any board members. Another former board member said the administration had left scientists in the dark on its plans. It almost didn't matter what question we asked. The answer would almost come back exactly the same, and it would always be along the lines of, that's an active conversation with the administration, end quote. A lot of euphemisms, but no actual answers. So anyway, National Science Foundation, bye-bye. Bye-bye, nerds. There's the door. You're going to be replaced with jocks and millionaires and people that contributed to the re-election campaign. Nerds are out the window. Gone. More crappy news. Taken all together, deforestation and climate change may forever alter the Amazon. Do you think? If deforestation and global warming continue unchecked, the Amazon rainforest could begin a gradual transition to be degraded, grass-like ecosystem in just a few decades, according to new research published this week. A study published in the Journal of Nature on Wednesday provides new insight into when the forest might start to slip over a tipping point at which an incremental but profound and irreversible ecosystem transformation begins. So basically, they said that at the current rate of deforestation, within a couple decades, there will be an irreversible, precipitous loss of the rainforest. The rainforest will disappear and be replaced with a grassland. All the species in the Amazon rainforest, which is the most diverse ecosystem on the planet. More species exist in the Amazon rainforest than anywhere else on the planet. More undiscovered species and unknown species of plants and animals are in the Amazon rainforest than anywhere else on the planet above the surface of the ocean. The consequences of the Amazon tipping point are catastrophic for the entire planet, said Bernardo Flores. We need to be careful not to let it get anywhere near those risks. Of course, we're not going to do anything to stop the deforestation because the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest is happening primarily because the country of Brazil, which most of the rainforest is in, or a majority of it is in, they are economically competing for the market in beef, and so they are cutting down trees, burning and cutting down the rainforest, replacing it with grazing lands, grasslands for cattle, which not only removes rainforest but adds cattle, which adds methane, because Brazil wants to be the world's largest producer of beef, and they're promoting to the world that everyone in the world should have the American diet of, basically living on 3 hamburgers a day. And if every human being on the planet is living on steak, well, that's a lot of cows, and they want to raise all those cows in the Amazon. When trees are lost on a large scale, the region's climate becomes drier, and other effects of climate change like drought and wildfire become more offensive. In a theoretical world without deforestation in the Amazon, the rainforest would be able to withstand up to 3.7 degrees Celsius, or about 6.7 degrees Fahrenheit of global warming. But in today's world, the planet has already warmed an estimated 1.4 degrees Celsius. At least 17% of the Amazon rainforest has already been cut down, burned, or otherwise lost. This means that the tipping point could be reached relatively quickly, researchers found, according to their analysis. A scenario where 22% or more of the Amazon rainforest is deforested, the majority of the ecosystems becomes vulnerable to collapse at temperatures of over 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. This danger zone could theoretically be reached in about 25 years. 25 years. Complete collapse of the Amazon rainforest in 25 years. Maybe quicker if they continue to clear cut for beef. But you'll have your hamburgers. You'll be dead because it'll be 130 degrees outside all the time. You'll be dead, but you'll have all the hamburger you could ever want. This is technically science news. I usually don't cover tragedies, but these are 2 articles about recent, within the last few years, catastrophic plane crashes. The analysis of both of these came in within the last few weeks. This was the most disturbing one. Sign of struggle in the cockpit before 22 crash. This one, it's a Boeing 737 crash of a China Eastern Flight 5735, which remained shrouded in secrecy because China Airlines. Descended from 29,000 feet with no survivors. Apparently, information got leaked, and a report by the National Transportation Safety Board shows that the dive began when a pilot or pilots, and one of the 2 pilots, pressed the cutoff levers, essentially fuel switches for both engines, mid-flight, turned off the fuel, and then pressing down on 2 levers simultaneously stopped the fuel flow from the engines to shut them off. And almost immediately, data from the cockpit controls show, the plane entered a terrifying dive and spun in at least one 360-degree roll, The data shows the control wheels in the cockpit, there's two of them, one left and right, have been turned to produce the roll and then pitched down. The jerky back and forth movement of the wheels suggests that at least two people were fighting in turn to keep them in different directions. So the pilot and the co-pilot were fighting for control of the aircraft. One of them was succeeded in purposefully nosediving the aircraft into a death stall. Aggressive movements to pitch the airplane down and roll it dramatically tell me that this was an intentional act, said one of the researchers. Yeah, a former NTSB accident investigator said that other aspects of the data supported the idea that there might have been a struggle between the two pilots for the flight controls, and that the flight data recorder stopped running while the plane was still in mid-descent, about 26,000 feet, because the engines had shut off. Without the engines, there's no electrical power, and if they don't start up the backup power unit, which is sort of like a fuel-powered, like a generator, like a internal combustion generator. If you don't start up the auxiliary power generator, you don't have electrical power, and without electrical power, the flight recorders don't run. But yeah, so this isn't the first time this happened. It happened in that German flight too. But the most horrific kind of scenario is one where a pilot or co-pilot intentionally commits suicide with a full complement of passengers. It's not known why pilots do this, but they occasionally do. Because in that German flight, it was the co-pilot had locked out. The pilot left the cabin. They locked the door from the inside and then crashed the plane. But this flight did that. Why do pilots do that? We don't know. But the other one, Flight 2216, this was very well known because this is the Korean Airlines flight, which they hit a bird strike, South Korean, and this is amazing. This photograph actually shows that's the flock of birds, and there's the plane having just flown through the flock of birds, and that puff of smoke there, that's the engines going out. This was like a Sully Sullenberger situation. Actually, this article, it's a 2-page article. Sully Sullenberger actually was interviewed for this to give his accounts. The pilots in this case made some decisions. I'm not going to say errors because they made decisions that they might have had good reasons for. It's a tragedy because the pilots had 2 engines gone. There was a double engine flame-out failure, bird strike, just like the Miracle on the Hudson, the Sully Sullenberger flight. They hit birds right after takeoff, loss of both engines. The pilots were very experienced. They banked the aircraft very hard, did a hard turn to go back to the airport. They did land the plane. They belly flopped the plane right on the runway, fighting the controls all the way with no electrical power and anything. But ultimately what happened, and Sully Sullenberger agreed, what ended the flight was the fact that what they didn't realize when they came around the reverse approach going the opposite way, they didn't realize that that runway had, at its beginning, because they were going the wrong way, a concrete wall that shouldn't have been there. There was a concrete wall at the end of the runway. And so when they belly flopped onto the runway, they slid the whole way and they had no way to stop. And they ran full force right into this cement wall. The plane was full of fuel. It blew up. Only 2 people survived. There was 2 flight attendants that were in the tail of the plane. Everyone else was killed. But the analysis was that they did land the plane successfully. And Sullenberger says that if the concrete barrier weren't there, they would have just slid off the end of the runway, they would have dug into the grass, probably everybody would have walked away. But because that barrier was there, they had to stop, and in order to stop, they would have had to have their landing gear down, and they didn't drop the landing gear. There are these 3 handles in the 737 that are underneath behind the seat of the co-pilot. And you have to open up a door, a little trap door, and then you have to pull up these 3 cabled handles to manually deploy the landing gear. There's 3. And they didn't do that. And again, just like that last crash, they don't exactly know what was going on in the cockpit because the flight recorder stopped recording because when the engines failed, they lost electrical power. The biggest mistake that the pilots made in this is they did not turn on the auxiliary power generator to get power back. If you've watched the film Sully with Tom Hanks portraying Captain Sullenberger, one of the things that they really point out in that movie is that one of the things that he did to survive that crisis was that he actually jumped the checklist. There's a checklist for a double engine failure that you got to go through, and he actually jumped ahead and turned on the auxiliary power first. It was the first thing he did. As soon as they had the bird strike, he just says, I'm turning on the auxiliary power unit, and which basically was responsible for saving the aircraft, because with that you can maintain hydraulic control. You can fly the plane with a dead stick. You can't do that if you don't have the power unit on. But they apparently they didn't do that for this. But yeah, so pilot error. The decisions a pilots make in a crisis. That's what the last season of The Rehearsal was all about. If you haven't seen that, it's an amazing thing to watch. It's a comedy show, but this one is dead serious because it's about this very thing. The Rehearsal takes the season to investigate why airplane crashes happen, commercial airline crashes happen, and comes to a hypothesis about the role that communication in the cockpit plays in airline disasters. And the whole series of the last season of The Rehearsal is about his pursuit of getting to the bottom of whether or not pilots and co-pilots communicate, how they communicate, and his ultimate solution is one that you would not believe. And I will not do spoilers. Please don't do spoilers in the chat about The Rehearsal. But that last season, the final episode is an absolute mic drop. You gotta watch it. The rest is all just sad. Everything else is just too terrible to read. I usually have like a lighthearted thing to end the thing with. Some of those I gotta look into. I'm too tired. I'm gonna leave it at that. That's just gonna be the end of it. That's the end of the news. I usually have a lighthearted thing to throw at the end. I just didn't have one for this week. But I'll try to look for something lighthearted for next time. Berserk. In my lab, it's where I work. That's what you're watching. Friend Lab. That's what I'm doing. Working at the bench again.